Good morning. This is Richard the Schwalik, and I'm going to be talking about today black culture. Black culture. Now, I read a couple of articles, one from a conservative, one from a liberal, about Indianapolis, Indiana. And one article is from 2002, one article is from 2020. And John McWhorter wrote the first one in 2002, and this one, Molly G. Martin, wrote it just recently in that 2020 situation. And they both were explaining why Indianapolis is like how it is. And I'm starting with black culture because that phrase is seen in probably at least two different ways. Conservatives see it negatively, and liberals or black Americans see it another way, right? And not all black Americans see it exactly the same way, but from a standpoint of there are going to be at least two different views, probably a billion different views, but from that standpoint, we're going to start with those two different sides of the situation, just to simplify it for this moment in time that I'm going to be talking about. So, I'm a Hoosier, born there at least. But I was born in South Bend, so we're not Hoosiers, we're Fighting Irish, if you know what I mean, because we got this football and deal going on. Anyways, that's really neither here nor there, but I'm attracted to stories from that area, generally, I guess. But this came out of, I was researching John McWhorter, and I got this article, and then I was looking for a rebuttal to it, and I found it, actually 18 years later. Somebody else might have responded in a similar way earlier, but that's the two I found at this point in 2021, of course. And I was just at the vigil the other night. I live near Minneapolis, so I was at the vigil the other night of George Floyd and others that have been shot by cops or killed by cops, murdered by cops. And very powerful speakers there. Common was there, actually did some songs, really great. I've never heard him perform on stage live, so that was very interesting. But the experience was very good. I used to ride my bike on 38th Street a lot back in the 80s when I worked at a place down the road. So I was familiar with that area, haven't been there in a while, but I went back and experienced that the other night, the 25th of May. So those are kind of the reference points of where I come at, just some basic ones. There's millions of other ones that I come at this from. So I'm not just getting into this because some white guy is feeling guilty about something. Although I do feel guilty about a lot of things, but I was also born Catholic. So, you just kind of come into the world with that going to happen pretty quickly about feeling guilty about something. That's kind of how we do it in the Catholicism area. Not that I'm involved in that anymore, but okay. So, black culture. I've read also Thomas Sowell, actually talked about my video yesterday, but that concept, I feel very uncomfortable with it because it really is been used as an epithet by too many people, right? White people, I should say. Very much so white people versus anyone else. And so when I hear it, my ears perk up and I go, okay, what do you really mean by that? And a lot of people take that, the context they take it from is that there are communities that have various serious crime problems in the United States. And what black culture means from a negative sense is it's drugs, it's unwed mothers, it's no one working, it's welfare, all these different things are said in and around it as if that is black culture, right? And if you're simplifying that to black culture, that is racist. Not because you are racist, as in spitting out slurs and spewing slurs all the time, racist slurs and burning crosses. No, but it's because that you're looking at it one-sided. If that's all you say are those 4, 5, or 6 things that I said about it, then you are racist because you're not looking at the whole panoply of things. Because there are not 6 things that have done just anything in our lives, right? It's all kinds of things. I was really good at studying. That's why I was a good studier. Or no, because your parents were good at studying and they helped you study. There's all those different things. Now I just lost my headset, so we're going to go without that. Anyways, so we have all these issues, right, that are involved in any kind of situation, especially if you're talking about a whole city, right? There's all kinds of things going on at the same time as you have drugs and this and this and this. I didn't bring up cops. I didn't bring up crime. Well, once you say crime, what do you mean by crime? Do you mean that there are crazy laws like in Ferguson where they needed to make all their money off of pulling people over, and they mostly pull over African Americans, Black Americans, by a large percentage more, even though there were white people living in that general area or in Ferguson, they picked on Black Americans, right? Mostly. And then if you're making your money, what are you apt to do? Pull over them for every little thing. And then if you are racist or you're racially profiling or you're biased or whatever, who are you going to pull over more, right? I mean, all these things propel in a number of different areas for a number of different reasons. Ferguson has one element of it. Other places have different elements of this inertia or propelling into bad things, right? A constant push towards something. Why is that occurring? In Indianapolis, from what John McWhorter says, is that it was drugs, it was gangs, it was welfare, and that there was all this crime, and that's why it occurred. That's why the community deteriorated. Indiana Avenue in Indianapolis was where he kind of centered it, in and around that avenue. That's where a lot of Black businesses were back in the 30s and 40s. And why would, and this is a good presentation. It's not, I don't think it's correct at all, but it's a very good presentation how John McWhorter said in the 30s and 40s, all these Black businesses were going gangbusters. Why did it change? And he uses this, which is like, well, why did it change? Wow, there were businesses. There must be something Black culture, is where he gets to, of course, that caused it. It wasn't the white people that did it. It's something that occurred in the culture. Okay, so why would it be better, quote unquote? Now, I'm not saying it was better in every way, but some of these things were better. Let's say people were getting better education. People were getting, creating more businesses. They were doing all these different things that were positive, right? All these things that are positive. And then around the 1960s into the 1970s, kind of, you take 1970 and go back maybe 5-10 years, you go in and maybe, so this occurred. It transitioned right at that point. Up till today, it's maybe worse, but in that 1970, give or take 5 or 10 years on either side of it, something happened. Why would it occur then? And why would it occur so quickly, according to him, at least? But I think it did occur very quickly. But he says it's Black culture. So the culture changed in 5 or 10 or 15 years. The whole culture. And now it's Black culture, of course. So, and this is a layering effect that racism has. And people get, oh, it's not systemic. Well, think about it in a layering standpoint. Layering of racism on top of racism. You peel back one part of it and say, look, we did something, but you didn't peel back all of it. You just peel back part of it, right? And then it grows back in a different way, maybe, some of it, right? It doesn't completely go away, right? It's like gangrene. If you treat it with something, okay, if you treat racism, the gangrene of racism, with a little bit of antibiotics, and I'm terrible at medicine here, but, and it knocks it back, but you're supposed to take it 10 days straight, right? A pill each day for 10 days or whatever. And you only take it 7 days, and you knock it down in 7 days, it's going away, and so you quit taking them, okay? That's what we usually do with racism. We peel off some layers, and we're proud that we did this for 7 straight days when it was really tough to take all those pills, 1 or 2 pills, really tough. Yeah, right, it wasn't. And we get to that, and we see, whoa, it's going away, and so we quit. And that's usually what we've done with racism, right? We ended slavery. Of course, we had to wait till we blew up the whole country to do it, right? Then we ended it, and then we go, yeah, we're done. Yeah, we'll take back most of it and have Jim Crow. That's what we do. We've always done that. You don't want to recognize that? Fine. But so John McWhorter, he's saying that in Indianapolis, it changed because of the culture fell apart. Why would a culture fall apart in 5 to 15 years? Because they had to do that because things started, quote unquote, getting bad really quickly from that late 1950s to whatever, 1970, 75, and there it was falling apart. By 1975 or so, it had fallen apart from what I remember from the story. But it happened pretty quickly. A disease came in there and they all go, black culture is changing, and they metamorphosize in their basements, and then they came out and they, the other people were gone, and it was the pod people that walked out. And now the black culture has changed automatically. Like just some kind of influenza came in and the black culture was infected by it. And then they, like white people, that's happened to them. No, why doesn't it happen to white people? Because it happens to black people because I'm racist. You can't jump that shark and then say you're not racist, okay? Because black people aren't different than any other human being. They're people. They're people. I've met people that happen to have black skin. On that 38th Street was a person that I worked for. Bilbo Breland, that was his business. I worked for about a year for him, 1983 to 84, I think it was, yes. I worked at his place down near on 38th and near Riverside, right behind right actually in front on the other side of the street from the theater there in Minneapolis. I worked for him. He had moved up from Mississippi, worked very hard. Owned his business for over 30 years when I started working there. I think he ran for another 10 years. Great guy, worked hard, all that. So if you've saw one person that was black and you thought they weren't doing what you thought, and then you made your racist assumptions from that would be bad, because my assumptions from this situation, I've had other experiences, but that one was pretty good. So I could say all black people are really good and hard workers. Well, I would not be telling the truth, because not every white person is a really good hard worker just because you see one white person, right? So you can't use those kinds of simple gymnastics to come up with your proposition. You have to have a logical framework that holds it up good. And culture does not change overnight. Culture takes a long time. Culture takes a long time. So if it isn't culture, and I have proof for that, if I do, what is it? And this is where Molly comes in, and I didn't know everything about Indianapolis any more than I know anything about my whole community. I've been, where I live out in Minnesota, west of the Twin Cities. I don't know everything about it, right? But Molly had some information. It was counter information, right? It was something that pinpointed some dates. Because what John McWhorter can't do is pinpoint when drugs started affecting the culture, meaning, patient A, as they call it, when there's a disease. Who's patient A? Okay, patient A had drugs. He took those drugs, or she, and then the next person, patient B and C and everyone else, right? Where did that come from? Okay, because it had to be like drugs. It wasn't like crime. Crime doesn't start crime. I mean, there's been crime all the time, and I've never been able to rhyme. That's terrible. Okay, right? So you have that. Was it crime? Well, not really, because crime doesn't beget crime. Drugs does beget more drugs, potentially. So patient A, how did patient A start it? If it's defeatism, like he brings up too, and welfare, patient A and welfare, what happened with those patients, right? What happened with the people that got welfare? Pinpoint who they are and start following that trail to how it actually happened. Don't start in the middle where you see it falling apart, because that's not good enough. That's not good enough. You can't just tie a bunch of facts together and say, look, right? I mean, you can. That's what he did. I just think, first, before I go on much longer, because I can go on forever on these things, what I'm saying is just look at the black culture versus a more physical, actual thing that came in that you can see pinpointed on a map. And that's what Molly did for the most part in her article, her essay. The essay is talking about the activities that were occurring. She also brings up the great things that were happening in the 1930s and 40s and 50s, right? Now, everything wasn't great there, but comparison, there were great things occurring. She brings up some of the same stories. The gal, and I forget her name, but hers is very famous. I think it was just in a movie or documentary recently on Netflix about a black woman that had a cosmetics business. Okay, she brought up all these positive things, so she wasn't avoiding them, and she was showing the decline. But the decline, you know how it occurred? Through city actions by white people. And you can read the whole article. Okay, I think it's in New America. I think newamerica.com or .org. I tried to see if I could Google it, but it didn't just come up with that. With John McWhorter, it went right to that article. I just put John McWhorter and Indianapolis, right? But Molly G. Martin, her article didn't come up right away. So you look under New America, and it's I think it's February of 2020 she wrote the article. Okay, so she pinpoints all these different elements, right? And to me, that gives a very specific timeline of when things started falling apart. It is very, very detailed comparative to John McWhorter's. Now, once again, he could be right. But his logic and his factual information is too sketchy. It's there. It's obvious it happened, but what caused it to happen? And that's where the black culture statement comes in and can't be right. Black culture did it. Well, if black culture did it, it's this black culture, because he doesn't mean his black culture. Does he mean all black people are susceptible to black culture, as in this case? If that is true, then that's racism, right? You can't use generalized statements about some activities without making you complicit in that. And then if you're saying this generality and then it's black culture, it can't be black culture. It can't be black culture. It is something else. Because once you frame it like that, you're a racist. Now, racists, first of all, race is bogus. It's a phrase that we use, but there's no such thing as different races. And when they came up with races, they meant different species, like different kinds of humans, okay? Humanoid A, humanoid B, different kinds of humanoids, okay? It wasn't about colors of skin. That's what they were meaning back in the day, 300, 400 years ago, when they first started coming up with this concept. And they never had this concept before. And again, slavery wasn't slavery like it was before, okay? We changed slavery. It used to be just you were a slave for a certain amount of time, and then you weren't. And you just walked away. And there was no color basis to it. There was no signifier. There was no X on the head of an ex-slave, so you could say ex-slave, ex-slave. There was nothing like that back in the day. Now, there might have been other things, but I mean, you did not know a person was a slave just because. Maybe 1 out of 50 people wasn't a slave back in 1850 or something, 1 out of 20, whatever it was, right? So if you point out a black person anywhere in the United States, they could have been a former slave. You would be right 19 out of 20 times or whatever, right? And so just because they're black, but no other slaves in history categorized in a color basis. You were a slave and you were a slave. You could be of any color, of any race, of any place. So that's different. So you have racism. We're going to just use as the phrase that we use now, more as a colorism, but nobody really understands that. But colorism is what it is, right? But in this case, we have something that's going on there. And if you're participating in that frame of mind as black culture, you are a racist. You just fall into that bin because you're calling someone a different race, first of all, even if you think that you're a racist, because there's no such thing, right? And it's a very fraught term, but it's like any other term that we create. It's hard to excommunicate that term, in the language, because there's so many things wrapped around it throughout time, and you've got to be able to unwrap those at the same time you're talking about it, and that takes too long. So Molly took this information, and she looked at it. What did they do? And I'm just going to remember some. I should have wrote those down too, because my memory is terrible, especially when I get pumped up like this. Everything just goes blank up there. Not that bad, but almost. Almost. She's talking about land grabs. The university was taking land, destroying, saying, "Oh, these houses are worthless. Let's get rid of them." Even though people lived there, they got rid of those houses. Large tracts of land just chewed up, and then they wanted to put a highway through, and then they, all these different things that were created. Then they dispersed people in different areas. And when the riot occurred in 1969, they had chewed up that whole area. The white people had chewed up that whole area and got rid of businesses, got rid of different things, because they were taking it up. They were going to build new things and do this, and just scattered people around. And it was, I don't know, a third the number of people that were there originally in those great halcyon days of the 30s, 40s, and 50s. They destroyed that, and people had to leave. They were forced to leave. Another thing that happened, as I'm remembering this, was that they got more racist in how they dealt with the area. They wouldn't let white people go in there to buy stuff. Some of the traffic, a good enough portion of the traffic that came in and bought things from these Black Americans on Indiana Avenue and around in Indianapolis, were now not allowed to go there. How can you run a business if 20 or 30 or 40 or 50% or more of your clientele is zapped from you? It just destroyed the area. It depleted it. Somewhat wealthier people just moved to a little bit better place if they could. Of course, as even John McWhorter says, that whole, it was KKK heaven in Indiana. I never even understood this till I moved away, that it was run by the KKK in the 20s, especially. Just the whole legislature and everything was run by KKK in Indiana, the whole thing. And do you think they just disappeared? How about, see, this part here. Okay, I'm going to end with this, because I could go on. I could just keep talking and babbling along. This is the key point that John McWhorter did not bring up. What happened to the white culture? Once that KKK went away, quote unquote, did they go away? No. Do you think those people that control the whole legislature disappeared because they weren't controlling the legislature? Do you think maybe they were in the police departments, in the land grabbing union associations? Didn't tell you about that, did he? No. Those people were there. I'm going to tell you that the white culture is pretty fucking scammy. The white culture is scammy. Now, we're not all scammy, but we're in power. The whites were still in power in Indiana. They were still in power. Look what they did. Yes, some black Hoosiers helped them in some ways and shapes and forms. But were they lied to? Were they making money off the deal? Like I said, everybody's not perfect. Everybody's got a scam going here or there. Either, not necessarily from other people, but scamming their mind, lying to themselves, scam, right? We all got something going on. But whoever's in power, their scams can go on a lot farther. So remember that when somebody says black culture, what is the white culture that's all around that all the time? What are they doing? Please, people, don't get caught up in black culture as that's a negative thing. Because white culture, I could find some hell of a negative things in white culture. And there's tons of them. And how do you root them out? If you start talking black culture's the fault when it's actually white culture that's doing a lot of it. When you're not recognizing that, don't go picking on other people until you know what your people are doing. And you don't know, most likely, if you're white. You might, but most do not know. Otherwise, we wouldn't have these problems. Otherwise, we're wimps are not getting involved in stopping it. I'm going to add myself to that wimp category because I haven't done enough either. But that doesn't mean you should stop or we should stop. I've got to do more. You've got to do more. But don't blame it on black culture. because that's just too easy, too ahistorical. So don't do it. You're fragile. You are the person, the poster person for white fragile. If you say black culture before you've looked into stuff deeply, triple deeply, again and again and again to make sure you're not getting fooled by the white culture that's apt to fool you like it has for a long time.